the cost that I came up with when I was comparing DDR5 platforms to DDR4 platforms at the height of the cost problems with the RAM, I found that it wasn't cost effective to go to a DDR4 platform if you were already planning on going to a DDR5 platform. Let's try DDR3 and see if that can be cost effective and that can work. Wanted to talk about DDR3 platforms for a specific reason. An article came out not too long ago from videocards.net or .com. I think they have a couple of sites. Anyways, it was sourced from WCCF Tech, who stated that Colorful was planning on bringing back DDR3 motherboards sometime this month. And then later on, I saw a video from Jay's 2 Cents, who kind of talked about it for a little bit. One of the things that Jay's 2 Cents said kind of stuck with me in that I wanted to find out more. And so what he had said was that DDR3 platforms were, quote, far below any games requirements in the last 15 years. Now, granted, he was probably being hyperbolic about the 15 years things, but the implication there was that DDR3 platforms won't hold up in modern games. So I kind of wanted to test that out. So first and foremost, I've got this CPU, and this was at its time one of the highest rated CPUs back when DDR3 was the platform, right? And this is the Intel i7-4790K. And so I wanted to use this CPU because it is pretty cost effective, and we'll get into costs later in the video. It's at the top, if not near the top, of that platform as far as performance goes. So the RAM that I got was pulled from the inventory that I had obtained. I did a video a while ago where I bought $325 worth of used hardware. It happened to have some DDR3 sticks in it, right? And so this is one of them. And this is the G.Skill Ripjaws 1333 megahertz CL9 kit. And it's 2x4 kit, meaning 8 gigs total. And before you guys start going down in the comments and ripping me apart about using 8 gigs for this test, I do have another kit of DDR3 that's 2x4. So technically I could get to 16, but that puts me into a quad channel mode. And I don't know that it's going to be a vast negative impact me doing that. And so I wanted to test it out with 8 gigs first just to see what it's like. And worst case scenario, I'll add in these other 2 sticks. But if that for some reason takes a hit, then I would have to source a 2x8 kit and then revisit this whole test process. But for now, let's try the 8 gigs and see what happens. The motherboard is a DDR3 motherboard that I sourced, and this is the Asus Z97-A motherboard. And the reason why I wanted this particular motherboard is because this is a motherboard that has an M.2 slot. Obviously, this is going to be more along the lines of 3rd gen kind of SSDs. And luckily, I've got a 3rd gen SSD, and this is the Intel 660p NVMe. And this is 512 gigs, and it's a 3rd gen by 4 lanes SSD, and its read-write speeds are both 1800 megabytes a second. It is still faster than, say, like a SATA SSD, right? So I've got that. I've also decided to go with a fairly cost-effective cooler. It's brand new in a box. It's from ID Cooling, and this is the SE214 XT, which is a single tower, single fan CPU cooler, but it should be more than enough for the 4790K. The power supply I'm going to use is way overkill. It's just my normal test rig power supply, which is the Lee & Lee Edge 1300 watt 80 plus platinum. I don't really need that power supply, but I don't have the power supply wattage that I wanted to use, and I didn't want to have to wait for that to do these tests. You'd be fine with like a 750 watt, like 80 plus gold or even 80 plus bronze power supply. You'd have plenty of headroom with that for future upgrades. You can even use like a 600 watt power supply for this test. And this is the RTX 4070 Super. Now, granted, this is an overkill card for a system like this, but I wanted to make sure I had an overkill card, and at the same time, I wanted to put the bulk of the cost into the GPU with the thought process that this is the GPU that I would carry forward into, say, if I decided to upgrade a DDR3 platform to a DDR4 platform or even a DDR5 platform. And we're going to use Windows 10 Home Edition for the operating system. I'm going to go off screen and put this system together and run some benchmarks, and I'll be back. These videos are not the actual test videos. These were captures using OBS, and so the videos that you're seeing are for display purposes only, not actual results, because you do take a performance hit when you use something like OBS. So the first game we tested was Cyberpunk 2077. And this is no RT, no frame gen. At 1080p Ultra, we use DLSS balance mode, and same thing with 1440p Ultra. And so on the 1080p Ultra side, we did 78.3 average FPS with 1% lows at 33.8. At 1440p Ultra, we did 74.5 average FPS with 1% lows at 32.9. For Red Dead 2, also no frame gen enabled, no RT. We had both 1080p Ultra and 1440p Ultra. Both of them were set with DLSS balance mode. And at 1080p, we did 89.8 average FPS with 1% lows at 53 FPS. At 1440p Ultra, we did 88.8 average FPS with 1% lows at 52.4. For Marvel Rivals, we did no RT, no frame gen, and we did get a decent amount of chop here and there. One is at 1080p medium with DLSS performance mode, and the other is 1080p low settings with DLSS performance mode. And so as you can see, we've got some chop in there, and that's not because of OBS. That is some of the experiences that I saw in Marvel Rivals. That being said, 1080p medium mode with DLSS performance performed at 57.9 average FPS with 1% lows coming in as low as 6. For 1080p low preset with DLSS performance mode, that's the most playable at 61.7 average FPS with 1% lows at 9.8. So it can still be kind of stuttery. So we are having problems. It is still playable at these settings, but you do have to expect some stuttering going on. Now, Black Myth Wukong surprisingly did pretty decently. We've got 1080p with no frame gen, no RT, TSR set to 100 at high preset, and 1440p TSR set at 75 at high preset. And both of these settings did pretty well. I was actually pretty surprised. The 1080p results came in at 84.7 average FPS with 1% lows at 54.9, and at 1440p we did 82.3 average FPS with 1% lows at 54.3, which tells me that this particular game is really well optimized. And we've got Steel Nomad that we ran at 1080p and 1440p, both DirectX 12 runs. And at 1080p, we did 115.6 average FPS with 1% lows at 97.1. And at 1440p, we did 89.5 average FPS with 1% lows at 77.1. So pretty good results for Steel Nomad. And this is supposedly one of the best benchmarks from 3D Mark to use for overall gaming performance. And I suspect that what's carrying it the most is the GPU. Similar to the rest of the game results that have been pretty good, were probably because mostly from the GPU. Right, so those are the results. And as you saw, this DDR3 platform is more than ample for 1080p and in other cases even 1440p gaming, with the caveat that you're using something like a 4070 Super. Obviously there's other GPUs that you can try out, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly. But I wanted to talk about what our temps and power usage were like first. And so the top CPU temperature over the course of all those benchmarks came in at 62°C. So that's the topmost temperature it came in at. And its topmost power usage was at 78.1 watts. So pretty efficient overall. The GPU itself, its top temperature came in at 68°C with the top VRAM temperature of 70°C. There was a hotspot of 81.9°C, but still well within acceptable ranges. And its top power draw was 219.6 watts. The average RAM usage, believe it or not, on all those runs, over all those runs, was about 6.5 gigs. There was some spikes here and there, up to 7 gigs, 7.2 gigs, even at one point 7.6 gigs, but it never hit the maximum amount, which I found interesting, that the games are running pretty efficiently even with 8 gigs of RAM of DDR3. So take that for what you will. As far as I'm concerned, these test results show that a DDR3 platform built properly with a good GPU can hold up in modern gaming. Now, certainly, I didn't do a deep dive into all the games, just 4 games plus Steel Nomad, but still, that gives a person hope that something like this can work well. Now, the downside for this motherboard that I ran into, because obviously I got it used, was that one of the USB ports did conk out on me. It seemed to work and then it didn't work, so there might be a short in there somewhere, which I haven't looked into. And on top of that, the M.2 slot, so the default mode for this motherboard, that M.2 slot is disabled. You go into BIOS and enable it, but when I would completely power off the power supply, it would reset that setting. I don't know if that's just indicative of how that BIOS is, or the CMOS battery needs to be replaced, or there's something going on with the motherboard in general. I don't know. I didn't run any diagnostics to figure that out, but every time I power off the power supply, I would have to go back into the BIOS and re-enable that. And I'll show you a picture of where that's at in case you get a motherboard like this. You do have to do that, otherwise it's not going to see the M.2. And so it if that's where your operating system is, it'll act like it doesn't have an operating system because it's not reading that SSD. So just be aware of that. So let's get to the cost. And all the costs I'm going to talk about are before sales tax, all right? The CPU, the 4790K, that came in at $55 that I got off at eBay. The motherboard, the Z97-A Asus motherboard, I picked that up for 60 bucks on eBay as well. The RAM, as I said before, I got from that deal I made a while ago when I bought a bunch of used hardware, old hardware, for $325. So I already had that RAM on hand. So I went on eBay and looked up some sold costs on DDR3 2x4s, and it came to an average of about 11 bucks. So far cry from DDR4 and DDR5 costs. The SSD I had already on hand that I had pulled from an older used PC that I had parted out quite a while ago. And that was just sitting around doing nothing. So I figured, that might be a good thing. Plus, it might be cost effective. I looked up on eBay what it would cost for a 3rd Gen by 4 SSD, what's been sold recently on eBay, and that came in at an average cost of 33 bucks. The CPU cooler, the SE214 XT from ID Cooling, brand new out of the box from Amazon, that'll run you 19 bucks. The power supply, again, that's the Lee Edge 1300 watt 80 plus platinum power supply, but that's just because that's the power supply I had on hand for testing. I don't have a 750 watt power supply currently on hand, so I did look that up, and a power supply, say from MSI, which I do like their power supplies. So MSI has a 750 watt 80 plus gold fully modular power supply for 90 bucks on Amazon, brand new. And I don't like buying used power supplies, mostly because you just don't know when that power supply is going to go out, because you don't know how old it is. You don't even know if it's the right cables that are there. And at the same time, if that power supply goes kablooey on you, that's the one thing that could just tank all the other components all at the same time if it goes out. So yeah, I have a preference towards buying new power supplies rather than used. As far as a PC case goes, I used an open bench for testing this out. And so if you decide that you want to do something like this and you wanted a PC case, my recommendation is one of the most cost-effective cases that is at the top of its class for thermals and cooling is the Lee Langcool 207. It's got fantastic cooling. It's a little bit limited in space for cable management, but it's a fantastic case. And that PC case runs about $83 right now on Amazon. And finally, the GPU, the 4070 Super. The reason why I picked this is, one, it's one of my all-time favorite GPUs, dollar for dollar. When the 40 series was the most current gen GPUs, dollar for dollar, this is the GPU that gave you the most bang for your buck. And so I stand by choosing the 4070 Super as the GPU to test the system out with. Plus, it had plenty of headroom to fully test out the CPU and the system and how it performs in gaming. Now, if you want something more on the budget side, you get something like a 3060 Ti for like $150 to $200 on eBay. If you wanted to spend a little bit more than that, you get like the B580 from Intel. It's a solid performing GPU. I did a video a while ago when that GPU first came out, and it performed pretty well. An alternative to that would be the AMD's 9060 XT 8 gig, which costs a little bit more than the B580, but it is a current gen GPU from AMD. It just has 8 gigs of VRAM. You could also get the 16 gig model of the 9060 XT. Now that cost is approaching the 4070 Super. So take that for what you will. I'll guarantee you the 4070 Super does outperform that 9060 XT 16 gig in gaming. So let's talk about the cost of the 4070 Super. Look that up on recently sold on eBay, and that's coming in around $500 is what you can expect to spend. If you go retail, it's going to cost a lot more, probably about like 40-50% more than that. So all told, my total cost for this build before tax comes in at $851. And with that, you've got a large number of components that you can carry over into a future upgrade if you decide to go to a DDR4 platform or even a DDR5, really. So depending on the CPU you get, this cooler could still work. So you could potentially carry that over. The PC case you can certainly carry over, and the GPU obviously you can carry over. The power supply you can carry over. So the things that you can't carry over is the CPU, the motherboard, and the RAM. The SSD you could carry over for possibly like extra storage, right? Because now when you go to DDR4, now you're starting to look at, you still can use Gen 3 SSDs, but you can also use Gen 4 SSDs. When prices come down or come back down to more sane levels than what they are right now, and you start exploring DDR4 and DDR5 platforms, a decent amount of this stuff you can carry over to save yourself on a lot of your costs if the market corrects to where it's supposed to be, right? Sorry, Jay, if you happen to run across this video, I'm not trying to step on what you're saying, but I didn't want to assume that DDR3 platform is kind of dead for current gen gaming. And so as we saw, it works. And those are the results. If you got any questions or comments, or you'd like to chime in about this subject, feel free to write down in the comments, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you. If you got anything else you'd like to talk about when it comes to PC hardware, be more than happy to engage with you guys. And in the meantime, thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next one.